Welcome to the Sanskari Girls podcast. I'm Bandita Murarka, and today we're diving into one of the most provocative and necessary archetypes in feminist literature, that of a feminist killjoy. You know, those difficult women who refuse to smile, who won't stay quiet, and who insist on pointing out what's wrong, even when it makes everyone uncomfortable. If that sounds like you, then you're in the right place. Our guest today is Meena Kandasamy, a poet, novelist, and translator whose work fearlessly explores the intersections of caste, gender, and power. She's the author of multiple novels, including The Gypsy Goddess, When I Hit You, and Exquisite Cadavers, as well as poetry collections Touch and Miss Militancy. Her recent work includes The Book of Desire, a feminist translation of the Tirukural. Her novels have been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, the International Dylan Thomas Prize, the Jhalak Prize, and the Hindu Lit Prize. In 2022, she was awarded the Penn Herman Keston Prize. Her writing consistently centers women who refuse to be palatable, characters who embody what Sarah Ahmed calls the feminist killjoy. Before we start off, I have to say that Meena's poems have provided me a grounding for my understanding and explorations of justice. So I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation today. Meena, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to say hello and then we can start off?
Yes, hi, Vandita. Thank you for having me, and it's a great joy for me to also be with you. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing to talk about feminist killjoys. So yeah, thank you also for choosing a very interesting topic on which we can talk about today.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to deep dive into the first question. Your characters often find themselves in situations where speaking up comes at quite a cost. You know, it could be domestic violence, caste discrimination, or other forms of oppression. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you approach writing that moment when a character decides to be the one who names what is wrong.
Um, so my understanding, I'm a Tamil woman, and my understanding of our society, the broader Indian society, but very specific to the Tamil example that I have understood over all these years is that there is a established silence. And it's a silence that should not be disturbed. It's a silence that should not be disturbed for keeping the hierarchy. It's a silence that should not be disturbed. And it's a silence that, is very pervasive. And it also, I think, in some ways goes back to the conceptualization of the language itself, because in Tamil, the word for silence is amaidi, and the word for peace is also amaidi. So silence is peace, and in some ways, to break that silence is an act of breaking that peace, and it's a very tenuous peace. It's not a peace that is justice peace. It's not a peace that's a happy peace. It's a peace that is kept there, with all its tension and everything pulled apart, bursting at the seams to peace. But you don't want to disturb that, because if you disturb the silence, if you disturb the amaidi, you're also disturbing the peace. And therefore I think that this is really crucial to my understanding of why talking actually disrupts the peace, and why it disrupts not only quote unquote peace, but what is also a status quo of imposed a state of affairs. And this, I think, for me is obviously, and therefore when you understand how society operates, in that society, speaking out is considered very transgressive. It's almost considered like a sin, right? Like, because you ruin things not only for yourself, but you're ruining things for everyone. So this has been my perception all the time. So yeah.
No, that's really powerful. And I think just the equation of both words, even in a lot of the sexual and gender based violence that we do, in terms of supporting survivors, often the pushback is you're breaking peace. And now when you position it like that, that's really something. It also reminds me of your book, which is When I Hit You. In your novel, When I Hit You, the protagonist is this educated person who's married to what seems like a progressive professor, but she refuses to stay silent about the abuse. And you know that moment of how do these characters navigate being seen as the problem? Like you said, like being seen as the ones breaking the peace when they're actually identifying the problem.
How does character navigate? I think this is a very interesting question. So, where my understanding, if it is concerned, is that Sometimes, I think this was a popular slogan during the whole AIDS crisis, right? Like people would say that silence equal to death. That if you don't talk about HIV, if you don't talk about AIDS, then you're actually allowing it to fester. You're allowing it to go everywhere. So it was like, it was one of those other key moment of rupture where you understand that not talking is also deadly. That kind of, putting up with the silence, that demonstration of peace, that show of peace is also deadly for some set of people. As much as your talking back is hurting other people, your keeping the peace is also hurting one set of people. Therefore, I've always felt that, that it's very important to disrupt. And I think the characters, definitely when you're writing about domestic violence or you're writing about caste massacre, you're writing about class organization, you're writing about Islamophobia and racism in the UK. I mean, in all my novels, I felt that, it's not just the act of talking that is disruptive. Sometimes, silence can also be used as an extreme form of defiance, right? And I think that, in that sense, it's a very dialectical thing. So sometimes silence has the power to completely disrupt things. But for instance, in the face of extreme violence, like if you're a wife or if you're like somebody who is forced to confess, or all of these things go on, and you just don't talk back. You don't talk back because you want to keep the cards close to yourself. You don't want to divulge everything. And I think that, yeah, silence is very dialectical also. So on the one hand, you break a silence in order to break the hierarchy and the hegemony, but on the other hand, you also keep your silence in order to build movements, in order to build your own escape, or in order to not as a strategic weapon. And I think that, we have to understand silence in that broader spectrum of how it can operate. So you can weaponize it either way. So
That's
yeah,
really
I don't know.
beautiful.
Yeah, that's just my understanding. Yeah.
Oh, that's really beautiful. And it really goes to that question of generally feminist killjoys are seen as like they're angry all the time, right? But what you're saying also reflects for me your writing, which has such emotional complexity. Like there is righteous anger. And there is now what you're pointing out, the use of silence and navigating silence as a tool of resistance, perhaps, alongside feelings of love, hope, and vulnerability, right? So, how do you balance this? How do you balance righteous anger with other emotions, with speaking up, with choosing to stay silent? Is that an active choice you're making?
So no, when you talk about feminist killjoys, I just think of my mother. She was in academia for a very long time. I don't see myself as a killjoy. I'm actually the opposite. I think part of the reason is that because of the nature of my writing, right? It's always very uplifting topics, massacre, violence, state violence, rapes, custodial rape, all kinds of this. And because my working material has become very heavy and very both traumatizing and re-traumatizing, I make it a point that my life is absolutely only pockets of joy. And I think that, yeah, in that sense, but I don't think it's an answer for everyone. It's a very particular reaction to doing a very particular kind of work, a very particular kind of emotional labor, because it's not just emotional, right? Like at the heart of it, it also, that emotion has to become intellectual in order to reach people, in order to convince people, not just talk at people, but to talk with people. So my particular life, I mean, even in my own family, everyone laughs at me. They used to laugh at me for a long time because they're like, I could be in this really bitter fight. Everybody could be shouting at me, and then I'd be crying. But and instead of them saying sorry, I'd be the first one to go say sorry and become friendly. And this is the same with my relationships, the same in my friendships, the same, like, place of work or whatever. And I find that, for me, keeping that kind of not allowing, one small thing to disrupt my happiness, because I think it's for me very important, very, very important. Like, I don't want this small win. So I am not personally, I'm this a crazy joy seeking person. So, which is why I can understand the feminist killjoy really well. As I said, I came from, yeah, for me, it's a balance of my work. My work is too intense for me not to take joy out of my life all the time in every avenue possible. And I also think after becoming a parent, it's become even more of a necessity, a requirement, that you have to seek happiness and be a happy person, because there's no other way you can do parenting, right? Like if you're sad, if you're worried, if you're bitter, there will be immense amount of resentment towards your child. There'll be immense amount of negative energy, this a wrong vibe shift. It's all of these things. So yeah, I guard my privacy, but I also guard my that happy zone and that joyful state of mind very fiercely. And I think it doesn't come by letting everybody in. I also think it comes by having, like, be really choosy with your friends, really find the right people, because same political inclinations and a lot of those stuff. But I safeguard that. And I want to say that because that is as important as disrupting the joy, as being the troublemaker, because my work does that for me. So a lot of people find this, when they expect to see me, they expect to find this very intimidating person. And on the other hand, it's opposite, because I'm like, if I want my friends to remember me, I want them to think that, oh, Meena is fun. Like, Meena is fun on a night out. Meena is fun to chill out with. Meena is fun to bitch about with. She's fun if she's a mother's group. So I embrace fun. I embrace that happiness and the joy. And all of this to come back to what I wanted to earlier share with you, which is that I have a deep understanding of the idea of feminist feel joy before it existed as a word, and before it existed as a concept by, Sarah Ahmed, whose work I like, and it's a very specific thing that happens to women in academics. Um, because I remember, like, as I said, what I said about myself, I remember my mom being this really happy person with us, like really, like, there's never a time like I would think that she's always like Anna, like, she's never like always addressing me with endearments like Menu, Kana, like it's very, very kind person, right? And always laughing. And sometimes she would not even like look at my face, like if she's in a public meeting, because she's like, I look at your face and I want to laugh. Like, that's my mother to me. And then my mom was one day telling me that in her office, and she used to teach math at IIT Madras, that in her office she was called automaton, and she was called moron, and she was called devil. Yeah, so apparently everybody would just retreat and say the devil is coming, or they'd say the moron is coming, and I would be like, but mom, this is not you, because the you that I know is this, very kind mother, this very kind person, like, super kind, nice to the staff, like, friendly, talking and joking without the drive. It's like, I can't imagine a more, like, uh, cool person. And then she said something to me, and she must have said this to me. Must have been in school or something. She said to me, Meena, there's something you have to understand, that if I smile in my office, the second thing that happens is these men will turn around and say, Vasanta, make the tea, in a departmental meeting. So I think that how do you construct yourself as this, this strict person, or how do you construct yourself? And she was somebody who disrupted the kind of peace that existed, because obviously she took IIT Madras to court. She said that they have to implement the Mandal Commission reservation and the OBC SC/ST reservations in '96. So obviously it was a long drawn legal struggle for her. But the reason is that, when you're operating within a system that you're challenging, exactly as you said, for women for whom speaking up comes at a cost, because then there is ostracization, you lose your friends, and even people who are friendly with you can't be seen as being friendly with you. And I think it's all of this, and I saw that firsthand. As you said, it's a big lesson for all of us out here.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And your mother sounds like a very special and powerful person. Thank you for that. Um, I really like the idea that you've communicated through this, if the killjoy part being a construct, and how often that is a construct in response to the situation we're in, and to ensure that if I don't do that, the consequences are going to be harder, right? So I'd rather be that killjoy. And this is something I feel like a lot of listeners will resonate with. I think I know so many women who've had to become a certain persona because there is no other
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to learn to have your resting bitch phase. You you have to cultivate that that air of what you call nonchalance, not getting disturbed, not being perturbed. You have to learn how to give back to insults. Uh, you have to, and I think it's an everyday negotiation, right? It's an absolute everyday negotiation, and I also think that one of those things that I learned, I was not in academics for a long time, but I was a PhD scholar at Anna University, and I remember this one episode where we had a male HOD, and I was a PhD scholar, but I was also teaching. And he said, we have a department conference coming up, and he gave me a bunch of letters and said, you have to put these letters in these envelopes. And I said, I'm not doing that. I said, I'm a scholar. I'm here to do research. I'm here to teach. I am not here to put letters in envelopes. Yeah. Because I felt that I don't find any job degrading. Like every job is a job that's meant to be done. But there was something so gendered, so markedly like made to feel you inferior about the fact that you are asked to do this. Like almost like, oh, you may be a famous writer. You may be like, a good scholar. Like you may have a lot of name recall, but I am your boss here, so go do this. And I was like, how many steps is this away from him asking me to, untie his shoelaces or fetch him his umbrella or something? I'm like, no. All of that you can do out of respect or, because you have a friendship or understanding. I'm not doing this. So I went straight to the vice chancellor's office. And they were not letting me meet him. And I was like, I'm not moving. I'm just going to stay here all day. I'm going to come back tomorrow as well. So at some point, the vice chancellor meets me. And he passed away recently, but it's a wonderful man called Mannar Jawahar. So this vice chancellor summons my HOD. And my HOD is trying to explain. And he says, but sir, it's nothing, sir. It's just a small task. She's the only PhD scholar at this point. It was a humanities department in a tech university. So, no. You know what he said? Like, yeah, he said, I see all your point. I see it's just a small job. So you do the small job. She's a scholar. She's here to do research. Let her do her research. Was it settled? Amma, are you happy? And I was, yes, I'm happy. And then I walked back. And I realized that, yeah, obviously, if I was in academia, I would have become this person. You know what I mean? I would have become this person who has to draw these boundaries. I would have become this person who has to stake the claim. I mean, luckily for me, I have managed to subsist without getting into a system and where I can, yeah, put all of my efforts into the cultural work that I do in terms of writing a novel or writing poetry, and not have to negotiate power in this everyday manner. So
No, that's really powerful, and I'm so proud of you for doing that. But something I'm hearing from that also, and I'd like to nudge you to maybe share even from your writing is, do you feel this sort of truth telling has a certain loneliness? Um, and what does
do
that mean?
you do you
Are you asking me?
yeah do you feel it's lonely?
Um, so I'll be honest. I feel like I have been this person since I was 6 years old. I realized that I would rather be lonely in with others in the context of others than be lonely with myself. Does that make sense? Because if I was not telling the truth, I
Or
would feel
then yeah, you mean alienated with yourself? Yeah.
yes, I would feel
Mm-mm.
alienated with myself. So I will not say that it's never been lonely. But I'm okay with that loneliness as long as I feel at home in myself. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that, my mom's best friends, for instance, and it's really, really crazy to say this, but there were all these other women, but they all, like my mom is lower caste, she's Shudra, but all the women who supported her were like this Brahmin woman, but they'd all come and meet her in secret. Because they were all aware of, you see, on the other one hand, it's a very difficult institution because what is happening is caste discrimination, but there's also a lot of gender discrimination, sexual harassment going on there. And so I think that's the whole thing about loneliness, that even if people don't do the exact thing you do, there's always a lot of people who come and tell you we are with you. And that's inevitably always there. That so I'm sure even with my mom, like, who led a lonely struggle in so many ways, I think she got a lot of solidarity. Obviously, she got a lot of solidarity from other quarters, but she also got a lot of solidarity from within campus, from many people who felt empowered that she was fighting and doing the good fight, but who couldn't do that themselves. And I think that I also think that we cannot judge everybody, but like I find that very difficult, that you cannot expect that everybody is going to live by your parameters, because that's a quick way to lose friends, that's a quick way to lose any friendship, because I can't be like, oh, I'm writing everything for Palestine, why are you being silent about it? Obviously, if somebody is very silent and hypocritical, you distance them from your life. And but I think that's the kind of thing, right? Like, uh, I may have a lot of friends who do not necessarily support the Elam struggle for self-determination. And then you're like, okay, that, these are friends that you see, you can talk, you can chat with, have a tea with, but then they're not like deep friends, like, you know what I mean? Like, so there's like layers, and I think I have a very good filtration mechanism on where I let people in. And therefore, and I also think more than everything else, I think it's very important. I don't want to sound preachy, but because I'm a writer and I spend a lot of time with myself, and therefore protecting my feelings becomes paramount to me, so that I stay strong and unruffled, and I just do the work without, letting it hurt me. And one of those things that I have allowed is that uh, I don't think that we should invest so much that another person joining or not joining a fight uh, makes us feel lonely or abandoned or betrayed, because that means that we are afraid of the loneliness. And I don't think that because for me the question of justice is not a question of metrics. It doesn't matter if, like, it doesn't mean that if 2000 people sign a petition, it's a better, bigger struggle than if 10 people sign it. I mean, I think that everything has the inherent justice built within itself. So I don't think about this loneliness in the beginning. I think for a lot of struggles people are lonely, and I think you will feel inevitably lonely. But also, I don't think that this loneliness, for instance, let's say we talk about uh, a very good example would be like, abuse by professors on campuses. And obviously a few women do Me Too and expose what is happening, but obviously there's hundreds of students who might have gone through very similar experiences, who don't talk through, not because now they're students, but because they are married now. We don't know what kind of conservative families. They can't come out. Obviously, if all these students come out and say, this professor, he was an abuser, or, this professor was like stole my thesis, or he was like, yeah, doing this kind of thing, the system would clean itself much sooner, right? But on the other hand, I think it's a very unfair expectation, because what happens to these women who speak out? Like, a lot of them would be in difficult marriages, then the whole marriage would be like, oh, but what happened between you and the professor? It's like all of these endless things, because we are trapped in patriarchy. So it's like, we have to understand. I think that we need that space for understanding that, and eventually believe that everybody will empower themselves to a point where they can join struggles, because yeah, that's my wider understanding of it.
No, that's really powerful. I think especially the part, it's come up a few times when you answer the part of friendship, right? And the ability to form relationships and to be the person you want to be and need to be with friends, but also to be able to build that filter of, you can have relationships, not all of them have to be the deepest ones. Um, and to continue to bridge that with people in your lives. Has that been something that you've reflected on in your characters and in your storytelling as well? Like the ability to sit with grace, the ability to have relationships across differences?
I think that yeah, I think for the characters it's much more nuanced, right? Like, for me, it's a question of I think for me it's a question of like, okay, I go to a literary festival. In one angle, there may be, like, few people with few, differences, problematic posturing. But on the other hand, they are still one of the most liberated sections of society you could meet, one of the most non-judgmental sections of society you could meet, and in whom I find community. Like, they're not going to be page by page with Meena Kandasamy, they're not going to be like, oh, we support people's retaliatory violence, or, we support guerrilla struggles, or whatever it is that, whatever it is that I think is I don't know, my work speaks about or addresses. But I don't want them to be 100% on my side, but just the fact that they hold space, that they want to listen to you, they want to interact with you, they want to talk to you, and they give this community to you, for your voice to exist. I mean, it's still a community where, you don't have like all the writers going and saying, oh, but none of us read me now, or we don't take it. So I feel embraced by community. I don't believe that everyone should 100% be on the same page as and I think that kind of give and take is very important in how I negotiate these things. um and but on the other hand, for my characters, I think it's a really interesting situation, because with novels, I think that we definitely have to, we people are also in a lot of gray zones. But I also think that in fiction, there is a trap, there is the identity trap, much more than here it's a very fluid thing, right? Like um but I think in fiction there's the trap that, for instance, if nobody is coming to help somebody, uh, or is only another marginalized person coming to help a marginalized person. So it's all of these questions of trap as well, right? Like, so I think fiction, you have to make it very believable. I think that pressure on it is very high when you write a story, right? And sometimes. Even when you write stories, it's like so in early East Tanjore, who was doing the organizing, and lot of the organizing was done by communists who may have come from privileged backgrounds, who were working with people from agricultural laborers, landless laborers from Dalit and oppressed communities, and who were basically held in some kind of bondage with the feudal lords. And then the question is that you know. How do your characters navigate this? Like, yeah, in that sense, the friendship is political, right? The friendship is because they want, the person may want to renounce their privilege in order for a better world, in order to and I think that is very essential for me in my writing of fiction, to understand that there is a basic humanity that is larger than all of us, that's larger than any of our immediate reducible identities. So yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for putting it that way, Mina. Um, that also takes me to one question that I've been seeing in popular culture. And, there's this tradition of the mad woman in popular culture, from like Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth to like a Rekha in Khoon Bari Mang, or even more recently, Radhika Apte in Sister Midnight. And there's a quote in your work, which is, I'm the woman who's willing to display her scars and put them within exhibition frames. I'm the mad woman of Mondays. I'm the breastfeeding woman who howls. And this really feels like a perfect embodiment of what you would call a feminist killjoy, right? So, how do you see this relationship between madness and what you could call feminist refusal?
No, I think see, I think it's not just madness, right? It's also the state of possession. That like women in the south, in Tamil Nadu, but also in generally in the south, often in rural areas, or in oppressed and lower caste communities, regularly get possessed, and the possession is a way that allows them to exert what you call quote unquote agency, but also is a moment of truth telling, for them to say, for them to go and curse, for them to go and actually handle power, right? Like to because the act of speaking in tongues or speaking in that state of possession is seen as holy, right? And mediated through spirit, and therefore it's very powerful, and therefore something that will come true, and therefore women who are otherwise rendered powerless have access to power. And when I talk about, yeah, this embodiment of the breast beating women, it is again very cultural. I didn't come up with it. It's very cultural because in Tamil culture, if women beat their breast and curse you, then you are cursed. And actually, I saw this firsthand. When I was visiting Nagapattinam, and the former undivided Tanjore, because I was researching on the Kilvanmani massacre, that women used to do a lot of public lamentations. They used to hold public, funeral type of mourning and breastfeeding and what they call a pari, or just singing dirges for a landlord who was still alive. In a way, it was a sublimation of anger, but it also, in some way, it was this call for a poetic divine justice. But it was also this belief that all tyranny goes away, and I think that is that these are community mediated ways in which and also the way female rage is expressed, and these coexist alongside communist movements. These coexist alongside their protests for the red flag, their protests for higher wages, their protests for better working conditions. And I think it's a very beautiful amalgamation of it. And I think what I was writing is writing about it. And I think this question of madness and sanity, I think we have to nuance it a little bit, because today I think there is a general tendency towards pathologization. Like, I find it very hard to talk to people, because everybody is self-declaring that they are either borderline, or they are cluster personality, or they have done so much finding out what is their mental problem. And unfortunately, I cannot join that conversation because I do not know. I can respect them and mental health problems, but I personally, I'm still at a point where I can address my own concerns. Uh, uh, I don't. I mean, I obviously relax in different ways, but yeah, I think that one of the problems is that this idea of madness, or but not just madness, but also mental illness coming from that, should not become a barrier. Should not push us into paralysis, because I see that happening, because paralysis is the end of everything, that we still have to act, we still have to process, because mental health cannot be the reason. Because the problem is that we have used this mental health in very beneficial ways, but I also find that it has been overused. Like, we talk about trigger warnings and content warnings, and we say this is upsetting, but that also means that we don't want to talk about genocide, we don't want to talk about state violence, we don't want to talk about the killing of children, we don't want to talk about Palestine and Gaza, because our emotions are different. But people are dying. So, at some point you have to be like, no, I have to do work on myself. I have to get stronger. I have to face it, because what are you facing? What are you facing? You are facing like a temporary inconvenience to your state of mind. And that cannot be the reason for not joining forces with something else bigger than you. And I think this inward looking, this fact that instead of being part of a collective, this obsession with the individuality and with individual emotion, I think is also a very bad problem of capitalist individualism. I'm not saying that this struggles don't exist. They 100% exist. They 100% need help. They 100% need time. But with all due respect, I also think that, we have to, in some ways, actually doing collective work, doing organizing will help us, will help the people who face these problems actually come out of their own shell and feel meaning, find meaning, and find resonances. So yeah, I think this whole idea of madness is also should not be, it's either weaponized by the state, right? Like it's weaponized by the state that oh, this person is hysteric, women are angry because they don't understand, or they only have emotional responses. It's so this kind of women's anger, but also what is seen as a dramatic breakdown, is weaponized to make them feel like inferior and lacking in substance, but is also weaponized against us from trying to do bigger work. And I think that that kind of thing has to be addressed. So that's my reading of the situation. So definitely, I think that it has become a very double-edged sword.
Thanks for sharing that. I think there's also something to be said here about the increasing purposelessness and isolation, especially amongst young people, and how that is used and weaponized to individualize mental health issues, which are often quite systemic, right? And they're a result of the communities and spaces we occupy. And like you rightly said, sometimes organizing and taking collective action can be a great movement ahead to get out of that feeling and to get out of that space of stuckness. A question?
But
Yeah.
as you said, it's true, right? Like, who can be mentally in a normal state of mind given everything happening to us? I mean, that then you should go to the doctor. If you're like everything is fine, it's hunky dory, and like then you should be like, what's going on? Like, of course you're going to feel sad. Of course you're going to be disturbed. Of course there are going to be sleepless nights. Of course you're not going to know how to answer your children when they ask you difficult questions. So I think this is like, this is that's accepted. That's a natural choice. So yeah, and that's one thing. But I also think that with the young people, I think that they have been getting an unfair deal also, because they have been born into a generation that, had to go through 2 years or 3 years of COVID, when they're in a very formative time in which so much of the socialization is through social media, right? And so, but I still think that for all the disparaging that goes on about them, they still, like, you find there is pockets of resistance. You find something like Nepal happen. So
Yeah, thanks for that. And a question that came to my mind a little off script also when you were speaking is who gets to step back and who gets to say, I'm triggered, I can't talk about this. I don't feel like I can engage, like you said, when others are dying or facing extreme forms of violence. And that's something I was thinking about in the context of your books as well. A lot of your characters face intersecting oppressions, right? And how does being a killjoy or being someone who speaks up and takes action differ based on what system you're challenging, what your identity is? And how does that complexity show up in your fiction? And also generally in fiction, right? Like, are there women who can afford to be difficult? The same way, are there people who can afford to say, this is bad for my mental health, I need to step back, versus those who can't? And I think earlier you mentioned that, sometimes fiction forces us to flatline some narratives. So it's more palatable to
no,
the reader
not
or
not
to the
necessarily
filter.
flat, not necessarily flatline, but streamline, definitely.
Hmm.
Definitely streamline, because there is only so much that would be taken as real or something. So anyway, to come back to this question on how do women do this, I mean, especially in a fictional world, how do you navigate this? I think it's quite I still believe that obviously fiction should also capture all the complexities of life. Fiction should also be as close to life as possible. But life is very strange in that, very weird, bizarre things can happen. And in fiction, you still have to have fiction should be lifelike, like fiction should be believable. It's real life that is really unbelievable. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, okay, so in fiction, like let's say we are writing about an NGO, and somebody suddenly says that, the plot twist is that after a lot of struggle, the NGO seems to be like laundering money, or working for a foreign power. Then people are going to dismiss it, right? Like it would look like. But in real life, these kind of disappointments happen all the time, so which is why I think that the intricacies of real life, in fiction, it would be like no one saw it coming. They just say, "Oh, she just forced a climax," and but is that even believable? So it's a lot of you'd have to do a lot of foreshadowing. You'd have to put that kind of thing that people should have all of these doubts, and only then that the loss of credibility will be understood, right? Like in fiction, you have to, but in real life, there is no signpost, right? You don't have any signpost, and then bam, boom, something happens, right? So I think that, yeah, real life doesn't allow you to, it doesn't do the necessary hand holding that fiction does. And in fiction, if you try to show what happens in real life, it would just lose all absolute credibility. And I face this because I'm writing all the time. So I really face that. So fiction has to be like life. Fiction has to be so real. Fiction has to be believable. But life is absolutely doesn't follow any rules. And this is what I have discovered and these are general frameworks of writing. But coming to your very specific question, I don't know if I've answered it, but yeah, I've tried to touch on it. But yeah.
No, I
So
think
yeah,
you're
for women with intersecting oppressions, or whether it's women or queer people or trans people, I mean, their struggles are very real. But also, we understand eventually that in speaking for one struggle, you speak for all struggles, and in speaking for all struggles, you also address your own struggles. So I believe that at some point we come to that conclusion that life forces us to look at it from close quarters. So yeah.
no, thanks for that. And with that, like coming to some of our closing questions around contemporary relevance. I'm thinking of politics today. You could think of the Me Too movement you mentioned or other feminist movements. How do you think real world feminist killjoys influence fictional ones or vice versa? Have you seen that play out? Have you seen resistance take inspiration from fiction or the other way around? I know some of that's reflected in your work as well.
I actually want to go back outside, fiction. I want to look at, let's say, mythology, because fiction is a very in today's world, fiction is a very limited market, right? Like, fiction is about, okay, who is on a list, who is being sold, who is being published by one of these top 4 people, top 5 people. So it's a very specific, restricted market. But in terms of stories, I definitely think that stories hold a lot of power to challenge, to subvert, to address a lot of these questions. And I think that in that sense, they have been always. There's always been an element of subversion in them. Like, look at the motherhood of Kunti, for instance. Like, there's five fathers, birthing 5 children, a child that she does not cannot own up to, which is Karna, but a child that is so pivotal in the war, and Kushi, out of loyalty. So I do think that there definitely is a lot of myth and legend about or Draupadi's story. And for me, one of the most special stories is Draupadi's relationship with Krishna, which I find is so powerful, because what has happened over time to the male female relationship is that it has been um uh pushed into this sexual heteronormativity, that the idea of the male female friendship does not exist. But in my life, there are men friends I cannot do without, and on whom I've not had the slightest sexual attraction, and I possibly can say that vice versa for them. So it's like, so what is this platonicity? What is that kind of friendship? And what does it mean to have that kind of a male friend in your life? I'm not saying the man is the savior. In that story, you might have been the savior, but just to have that friendship, to have that place of holding space with a man that does not immediately go into the sexual. And I think that, yeah, I think therefore these women do inspire us every day, because the interesting thing with myths is that we don't get to pick and choose, right? Like, we don't make them. You don't make them. They're already there, and I think they offer a format for us to understand things. And on the other hand, does real life influence fiction? I do think, yes, I do definitely think that um when I was writing Gypsy Goddess, for instance, there was a lot of women I met who are like very powerful, and who'd all tell me some part of the story which would allow me to place what was happening in the 50s, in the 60s, in the East Tanjore district. Right? Like, they'd say, like, what did they do when the earliest tractors came? Because when they saw the tractors, they realized that these were going to take their jobs. So they would just sit in the path of the tractors. So it was like all of these little things that people were women were doing. And obviously, then when you write fiction, you are impressed with these women's stories, and you allow it to filter in and become part of your story. So I think, as you said and pointed out, it's really a two-way process.
Oh, that's really lovely. Thanks for sharing those examples as well. I'm sure for our listeners, that's going to be really powerful to be able to sit with and think about how it influences them and their lives as well. I'll go on a bit of a tangent. A lot of my early influence for myself and my feminism has come from the stories that my mother or my grandmother told me. Some of them, and I think a lot of them, now that I think about it, have roots in mythology or have roots in their personal lived experiences. And that shaped so much of how I think and I see the world as well. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So, over to my last question to you. If someone wanted to read more about difficult women, in fiction or like you've said, otherwise, but particularly from South Asian authors, what would you recommend? Who's doing interesting work with these archetypes? Is there even something historical that you strongly recommend people should read?
Oh, this is out of syllabus, because I didn't come prepared for this. So yeah, it's going to take me a little bit of time. So I just don't know, like, off the cuff, how to answer this. I think Uma Chakravarti has done a lot of good work on caste and gender. I think Nivedita Menon has done. Both are very seminal books, but I read them 20 years ago, and don't have much memory of them at this point to cite from them. In terms of fiction, I was reading Volga the other day. I think her work is good. I think that K.R. Meera writes very powerful female characters like nobody else does. So I like her work. And who else? I like Velga's work. And I think among novels, I like both Tishani Doshi, I like Anjum Hassan. I also think that Samhita Arni works with the confluence of myth and, modern day storytelling. So you have something like The Missing Queen, but they're all my friends as well. So of course I would recommend them. But I think you should read everything you get your hands on. So yeah, because books need all the breathing space they can. They really thrive on the oxygen of readership, and that's not a small support. That's a massive support. And so I think it means a lot to me, a lot for me to be here. And yeah, I think it's very, very special that, there's somebody doing like a 40-minute show on books. So yeah, more power to you. And yeah, I have another book coming out next year, but hopefully we'll meet again and we'll discuss that another time. So yeah.
Meena, this has been such a rich exploration of why difficult women matter in fiction. And thank you for really helping us think through both the complexity and necessity of feminist killjoys, be it in fiction or in real life. I think especially thank you for being so vulnerable in sharing moments and instances from your life. I think it's really made my understanding of how you write in your literature much richer. For our listeners, we'll
Sure.
be including a reading list of books that sort of feature feminist killjoys and also the recommendations that Meena has given. And of course, most importantly, we'll be giving you a link to all of Meena's work, and we really encourage you to explore it if you haven't already. This has been the Sanskarika's podcast. I'm Vanita Murarka. Strong reminder to follow us on Instagram, sign up for the membership. It's completely free, and subscribe to the newsletter. A big shout out to Anjali on production and scripting, as well as Kuku on overall coordination and support. We hope you keep writing, keep reading, and keep finding new ways to make your voice heard through the written word. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandita. The pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much. And
Thank you so
thank you,
much.
Anjali. Thank you, Anjali, for being behind the screen and making all of this so seamless. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anjali. Thanks, Meena. See you.